Ladies and gentlemen, here to discuss how fusion energy, AI, and scientific innovation can propel the next era of American leadership, please welcome Representative Don Beyer, co-chair of the House Fusion Caucus, and Steve Heuser, Global Technology Editor at POLITICO.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Steve Heuser. I'm the Global Technology Editor of POLITICO. I run a team of reporters who pay a lot of attention, especially to the progress of AI as a technology and a regulatory issue in Washington, D.C. I'm delighted today to have with you Representative Don Beyer, who, as far as I know, is the only member of Congress to have actually started a machine learning master's degree while in office. And if you're not the only person, don't tell me there's somebody else, because I want to be interviewing someone unique. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, very much. And thank you for coming to our session. We're very flattered that you showed up, given everything else that's going on here. And we'll try to make it interesting, I hope.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk, just for reference, I want to talk a little bit about AI, which is the topic of this entire convention, and what my team covers. We want to get into nuclear fusion, which is the other big task force that you're on. And if we have time at the end, we'll get into a couple of fun related questions. But let's kick it off with AI. You first came to my attention on the sort of AI world when you did the Hard Fork podcast back in 2023, I think it was. It was about 2 years ago. And at the time, we were at the beginning of what I think of sort of the AI wave in Washington, right? And there was a period of great concern. There was a sort of period of enthusiasm. I feel like we're pivoting now into sort of a new phase. And I'm curious, if you look back over those couple of years, where do you see the moment we're in now and how has it changed?
I've been interested in it for a long time.
Yeah.
So my studies you mentioned, I started before the breakout. But the turning point was when ChatGPT went public. I don't remember exactly what month that was, March of 2023, perhaps. Sometime, and all of a sudden, AI, which is largely limited, well, we had an AI caucus for years. And about 6 of us would show up for lunch, and we would always talk about the Terminator and stuff. After ChatGPT, boom, 200 people or 150 people in the AI caucus. Everybody's excited about it. The whole notion of what it will mean for the future of humanity. So the large language models was, I really think, the big turning point.
And where do you see it happening now? Like, I feel like we went through a period of pretty significant concern about the technology, and there was a huge, there was a executive order with a lot of talk about regulatory structures, and it feels like it's really shifted during this administration, this term. How do you see this right now?
It's definitely shifted in this administration. We have an AI caucus, of course, which is Democrats and Republicans. It's obviously educational, so it doesn't come out with legislation. But one of the things that Mike Johnson, our speaker, and Hakeem Jeffries, our Democratic leader, did a year ago, 14 months ago, was put together a 24-person AI task force, 12 Democrats, 12 Republicans. And this went hand in hand with what Joe Biden was doing as president. His AI executive order was the largest executive order ever written in America. It set up a lot of really interesting things, probably most importantly, the safety center out at NIST, National Institutes for Standards and Technology. And the shift with the Trump administration has largely come, they haven't done away with the NIST Center. They're going to rename it to maybe have a different mission. He took down the Biden AI executive order and put up a new Trump executive order, which was different. But I'd say the only real difference is how much regulation is the right amount of regulation. To oversimplify, the Biden approach was light touch regulation. The Trump approach is no regulation. And so that's the big difference.
Do you, is this entirely because of the change administration and the shift from like a Democrat to GOP Senate, or is there also sort of an underlying technical or economic argument driving it as well?
I think part of it is the rising importance of the tech bros. The Dario Amodei's, the Sam Altmans, the Jack Clarks, all the leaders of the big 4, maybe a big 5, Elon Musk building his own. And they have pushed, it's interesting, almost all of them, Sam Altman, Eric Schmidt and like will say, we will need some regulation, it needs to be light regulation, but not yet, not yet. And so, and given that most of them came to the inauguration and spent $1 million each, The current ethos is let them run free as long as possible, and then we'll figure out if there needs to be regulation later.
Brings us right.
Which is very different from where we were with Biden and Elizabeth Kelly and Ben Buchanan and people like that.
Early on, I know that you were sort of poo-pooing some of the skepticism and concerns about AI, and sort of pretty enthusiastic about developing it. What you're saying to me now is that we've sort of abandoned the idea that any regulatory framework is needed at all. What concerns you about that?
Because we don't know what we don't know. First of all, I still am a great AI enthusiast. Just the breakthroughs in medicine are so astonishing. Every single day there's something new. I met with one of the young entrepreneurs who'd created his own massive, it's not a large language model because it's not about language, but it's a big neural network just feeding in oncological data. And they got a 300, which is the perfect score on the oncology board certification test. He's expanded it now. They discovered one of the records they fed in was from a woman with ALS who turned out not to have ALS, that the AI came back to him in 5 minutes. So that's really exciting. I've spent most of my leisure reading now is on consciousness and the development of consciousness, which I've always been interested in, Steven Pinker, et cetera, but this is especially relevant right now because if we don't know where consciousness comes from, we don't know why our dog has so many different emotions, or why if you put a clamp on the leg of an ant, the ant will do everything it can to get the clamp off of it. There's cognition at every level. I don't know why we are so confident that as we build the most intelligent machines than ever, that they're not going to have consciousness. So I always want to make sure that there's somebody thinking about the existential risks.
Do you think that AI deserves civil rights protections?
I have not thought about that at all.
You're walking up to that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's more concerning though. When you begin to think that they have personalities, I don't know. That's a dangerous question, Steve.
They have personalities, but I don't know. Consciousness is its own thing, right?
There's.
Okay. I didn't know that we'd get here this quickly.
Yeah, there's some. So there's a wonderful. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I'll remember it in a minute. But there's some really interesting stuff written on consciousness that's just come out in the last year or so that really raises the ethical questions about what happens if it does develop consciousness. How do you treat it?
And do you turn it off?
Especially if corporations are people. Right?
So, indeed. So, there was a surprise, right, in the big beautiful bill, which is the moratorium on state AI regulations, which would basically not only mean that Congress wasn't pursuing any type of regulation, but would switch off the possibilities of states pursuing any type of regulation. This was sort of a surprise that it showed up in the language out of E&C, I think, and then went into the main bill. What do you think of that? I mean, I realized that there wasn't Democratic support and the party line bill, but what do you think of that provision?
Well, first of all, I'm very much hoping that the Senate parliamentarian takes it out, because it doesn't match with the Byrd rule. I was also thrilled to see that, who's our friend from Georgia?
Oh yeah, Marjorie
Taylor Greene, whom I generally don't agree with on almost anything. Right. I had discovered that it was in the bill yesterday and is concerned about it. So that makes me hopeful. So I'm against it.
Yeah.
I understand it because I do recognize that having a Tower of Babel regulations is confusing, especially for whether you're a car manufacturer or an AI large language model. On the other hand, you look at what we've done on social media in Congress in the last 25 years, which is exactly one bill making it so you can't sue them. Yep. There's no reason to be optimistic that Congress is going to pass a meaningful AI agenda. Mm-hmm. And if we are not, then we shouldn't be limiting the ability of California, Illinois, Virginia from doing their own thing. Jay Obernolte, the Republican chair of the AI task force, a very good guy, has said, well, we'll have the moratorium, and as soon as Congress passes it, we'll revoke the moratorium. But I think that when that happens is a really big guess.
Right, I mean, they give it, the moratorium's 10 years long, and you can imagine that law not happening for much longer than 10 years, right? So you mentioned that the sort of tech bros, right, are exerting a lot of influence over the conversation now. We've done some reporting that AI lobbying, just baseline lobbying, has increased quite a bit, like OpenAI, Anthropic, the sort of pure play companies are really getting into the lobbying game now. They're staffing up in Washington, they're hiring politically connected players, in addition to the existing tech companies, right? Where do you see that on the Hill? Like, do you see them showing up? And how do you see it? Who's talking to your staff?
Yes, I do. I mean, I don't see it personally as much, but I do see all of them showing up. Either Mark Andreessen, Sam Altman's been in my office, Jack Clark, the Dario Gill who was at IBM, and so they're very visible. They're very present on the Hill. They're nurturing relationships with lots of senators and a handful of members of Congress. Yeah, but it's really important for, I think, their ambitions, their expectations of the future for AI, to have Congress involved, even if it's only to keep us from doing anything.
Yes, regulation prevention?
Well, maybe. Well, at the same time, giving a head fake towards sensible light touch regulation. The EU has actually been very unhelpful for us in that sense.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because the European EU AI Act is self-described as super regulatory.
Yep.
And so, or I think, was it Mark Andreessen said, it's where AI goes to die. Mm-hmm. There are no innovations coming out of Europe because of it. But unfortunately, that sense that regulation will kill everything makes it more difficult to do light touch regulation here.
Right. You worked on the AI task force report, which was published, I think, late last year. Is that correct? And it's a lengthy, thoughtful, nuanced document, right? That touches on a lot of the opportunities, a lot of the concerns. There's an element of humility in it, right? Like there's a lot we don't know yet. I mean, you said this earlier, right? There's a lot we don't know, and more information is needed. Like length and depth and nuance are not something I associate with a political conversation a lot of the time, and I'm curious what you put in that document. Is that conversation happening anywhere in Congress right now?
It's basically, no. When Mike Johnson appointed the task force, it was for a year, so it expired December 31st. Yeah. Our great hope was that it would be reconstituted here in this new Congress. It has not yet been.
Okay.
I don't know why. I know my friend Jay Obernolte talks to the Speaker a lot without conclusion. My quick guess for those who care about these things is the standing committees like Energy and Commerce and Science and Technology may be threatened by an ad hoc committee. Or it may be Steve Scalise, who's the #2 Republican leader, famously said last year, no regulation, period. Yeah. We don't want to have anything. That's part of it, because we developed, in the 270-page report, we actually developed 80 recommendations, and some of the recommendations were mildly regulatory.
Right.
So if you don't bring it up. But however, Hakeem Jeffries has convened later this week or next week the Democratic side of that task force, at least talk about what we can do on a party basis to push this forward.
Interesting. So you're getting the team back together on the D side.
Yeah, on the D side. Although it's much better. The nice part is that 270-page report had all 24 people, Dems and Republicans, sign on to every piece of legislation and every idea. So that was among the most bipartisan things we've done in the time I've been there.
This opens up a whole second line of questioning, which is the emerging politics around AI. Like, I would say a year or two ago, you wouldn't have thought of this as an especially political topic, and now you have the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who just said a couple days ago, I think it was, AI is where like sort of smart liberal people go into, and then crypto is where the smart people on the right go. And I hadn't really heard anybody talk about it in such nakedly partisan terms.
Well, the Vice President is nakedly partisan. I am not, and so I very much hope that AI stays more bipartisan. I mean, it has the ability to impact everybody, everybody in the world in very positive ways. And by the way, there are, as with Dario Amodei the other day, talking about 50% of white-collar jobs being eliminated in the next 2 years. Oh, yeah. And maybe that's an overstatement, maybe it's 5 years, but we know that there are major changes coming to our economy. We need to be working, Democrats and Republicans, together to address those changes.
That's really interesting. I'm going to get a little bit more into that in a bit, but I also don't want to shortchange fusion, because it's the first word in our panel topic. Let's get into this a little bit. You talked the connection between AI and fusion energy. The first thing I think about, right, is that there's a tech bro enthusiasm about fusion too. AI is extremely power hungry. Fusion is like a sort of magical, endless energy, proposition, and it's a potential clean power source for AI in the future. That's one version of it, but another version of it I think that you've talked about is that AI itself is necessary to fusion and not just vice versa, right? Can you get into that a little bit?
Well, first of all, I am an enormous fusion fan. I feel that actually is my number one responsibility in Congress.
Really?
Is to be the biggest champion I can, because nothing in our lives will change humanity as much as successfully creating fusion energy. It'll be the biggest thing since fire.
Yeah.
It'll give us the opportunity to completely overcome climate change by having a non-carbon source to take out all the carbon in the air that we've put in the last 400 years. So carbon capture becomes very plausible. We have 2 billion people that go to bed hungry every night around the world. Fusion is the biggest single thing that will lift those last 2 billion people out of poverty and make economic progress astonishing. And we know it works. It's been around for 14.5 billion years. You just have to look at the endless stars in the sky and know that it works. You just have to do it here.
Yes.
The problem is the science is easy, the engineering is hard, and AI has created the ability to overcome most of those engineering challenges.
How does that plug in? Like, can you sort of get into without getting too technical?
Yeah, so the two easy ways is, number one, I've, along with Grace Brightbill, who's here, who's our lead fusion staff, we visited many of there are now 28 fusion companies in America racing to be the first.
Yeah.
And so we visited maybe half of them.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that they need to do is they run what they call a shot. They fire up the fusion and they hit it with electricity and they see what happens. And they try to do the shots every 3 minutes or every 10 minutes. Having AI analyze what the last shot was to enable them to tweak it, to raise the electricity, to change the dynamic, whatever. The simulation is really, really important. Then the second thing is that these big tokamaks, Commonwealth Fusion in Devens, Massachusetts is scheduled to turn on the first big fusion reactor in world history next year. But when you take a plasma, which is just hydrogen at 100 million degrees centigrade, looking at the shape of that plasma is incredibly important, but very, very complicated. So there's all kinds of really interesting fluid dynamics. Okay. And it is AI that is helping them do that math.
Because it's just generating incredible amounts of data, and then you need a really powerful algorithm and a brain to sort of work through it. And we're not talking like generative AI here. We're talking about the classic algorithmic, like massive data.
This is just math at this point.
Just math. It's just math and like trying to contain something as powerful as the sun, like, without killing us all. Talk a little bit about the role of Congress here, because when I think about fusion, I think about something, it's sort of in the zone of like quantum. It's a long-term prospect that requires a lot of basic research investment still. We're trying to get it to work. What's the role of Congress in sort of helping ideas like this ferment in our society?
I think Congress has a really important role. It's interesting that fusion is one of the rare technological breakthroughs of the last century, at least, that's mostly been funded by the private sector.
That's interesting.
Commonwealth Fusion raised a couple of billion in a weekend, for example. It's got to note that TAE in Southern California raised another $150 million a couple of days ago. But the role that Congress has, or the federal government has, specifically the Department of Energy, is to solve the engineering problems that would be helpful for every one of those 28 companies. Okay. For example, one of the big problems is high energy neutrons are created by a fusion reaction, and they will destroy anything. They will melt metal, turn it to dust. We need to have one of those generators so you can test lots and lots of different materials, which will help everybody. The sad part is that our fusion budget right now is $790 million, and a lot of that is for legacy projects, like the big ITER machine in Marseille, France, or the old D&D, D3D in Southern California, and very little is going to the new stuff. China's budget last year was $1.5 billion. So they're basically spending 5 times as much on the new research as we are. And this race is very important.
How do you fix that?
I went with some of my Republican friends to see our new Secretary of Energy, Phil Wright, to talk to him about it.
And how
make sure he was enthusiastic. He made no promises about the budget because he's not in charge of the budget. But the big push for us is to get the U.S. federal dollar commitment in a time of shrinking resources more committed to fusion, with the realization that investment will have huge payoffs in the long run.
Well, this is my next question, right? Is the money going to be there? Like this, we have a time of great, sort of fiscal constraint in Congress, and there are preemptive cutbacks already happening at the agency level.
The most optimistic I can be is that it won't suffer the same kind of cuts that NIST or the National Science Foundation or NIH or anyone else is covered. I also don't see it growing much just because the federal government's not growing.
Is the money from the DOE? Is that where it runs through the DOE?
It runs through DOE. There's actually an Office of Fusion Science within the Department of Energy. Yeah.
Does it also not require NIST though? Because NIST is sort of the standard setting, and they're sort of the physics department of the government.
An investment in NIST is not the big deal for fusion. They are paying attention to it, but it's more going to come mostly through the universities. It's the University of Wisconsin, it's Princeton, it's MIT, University of Washington. Okay. These are the big players in it, but those university dollars come from DOE.
You're naming a couple universities that are at risk of having the research money all yanked.
Yeah, there's very big concern.
Is there anything to do about that, or is that a unilateral decision that your Congress is just outside of?
It's so far an executive branch decision, which we are pushing back on. There are 250 different lawsuits now fighting the executive decisions that Trump has made. And one of the more prominent ones is what is done to university research. And Harvard aside, just changing the reimbursement, if you've given $10 million and you have to spend, you're allowed to spend up to 50% or 55% on all the infrastructure needs you have, that's way better than only being able to spend 10% on it. Yep. So almost every university has said the new rules with the same amount of money make for much, much less research.
Yeah, that's happening across the board. And medical's the big one, obviously, but physics is an important one. It seems like. If I'm rewind the clock a little bit, like when I was 7 years old, I literally took quarters and pieces of change and bought a book about atomic energy. Okay, and the end of the book in atomic energy is nuclear fusion, the promise of the future. It's the most complicated looking machine I'd ever seen in my life, and it was going to harness the power of the sun to deliver us unlimited clean energy. Now, my hair is gray now. And you know what? Nuclear fusion is still the promise of the future, the world's most complicated looking machine, and one day it will give us the power of the sun. Is there a role for Congress to sort of have to exert a little bit of a critical skepticism on a thing that we've plowed a lot of money into and hasn't generated I understand I'm talking to perhaps the wrong person about skepticism.
No, but
tell me how you see that.
In fact, I would say that the number one job of the Fusion Caucus is overcoming the skepticism.
Well, here, work on me a little bit.
Because I'm
very interested and also skeptical.
The Economist apparently banned the journalists who write this from using the old trope about it's been 50 years away for 50 years. Yeah. Every year it's still 50 years away.
Now we get to say that about quantum.
Yeah. But now we say, well, it's 45 years is up, so now we're only 5 years away.
Are we?
Well,
I know somebody's going to break ground on something in Northern Virginia. Right?
I was a skeptic when I first met with Dennis White, who's the head of the fusion department at MIT. And it took him 20 minutes to overcome my skepticism by basically pointing out that we have not been standing still these last 50 years. That the breakthroughs in so many other things, in engineering and physics, and for example, the ITER, the big fusion plant in France, is using big electromagnetic coils that are huge. And the Commonwealth Fusion was somebody developed a new superconducting, very thin copper wire that has a bunch of different particles on it. So they can do the same thing in the size of basically a stand-up television. So that's the kind of breakthrough that makes it happen much faster, much, much cheaper. And AI is part of that. So the engineering problems we had in 2000 are very different. We've solved most of them. We have a handful left to solve.
Who else besides you, when you think about fusion on the Hill, who else besides you should we be thinking about in terms of sort of thought leaders' names?
Chuck Fleischman, who represents Oak Ridge Labs, Republican from Tennessee. Jay Obernolte, from California, who did get his master's in machine learning from Caltech. So, he's a legitimate guy.
No, he is. I had him on a panel at one of our summits here, and he's really interesting on AI stuff. We didn't talk about fusion.
And then Laurie Trahan, who represents Lowell, Massachusetts. So she represents Commonwealth Fusion, which will be the first.
Up at Devens? She's the rep. Okay,
exactly,
gotcha.
right.
That's interesting. So if I could...
Two Dems, two Republicans. But the
played.
But the caucus right now is about 120 people, and yet again is very bipartisan.
How big is the AI caucus?
I don't know at the moment.
Okay. Does the AI caucus meet?
Yeah, we meet for educational purposes.
Okay.
So the last meeting we had the new AI Trump person on OSTP. The interim head of NIST. and one more person. And they were, they were all Trump appointees, but it was a really good conversation.
Is the OSDP person, is it Michael Kratsios, or is it somebody
No, it's
that
not Michael.
AI specific?
AI specific,
Gotcha.
yeah. I remember he was very tall.
A tall person.
Yeah, right.
Okay. I'm curious about this. When you, thinking about AI in particular, when you communicate with the White House about, because the White House has been out there on AI. Kratsios is very pro, American AI development. He's got sort of a hawkish approach to China, but he's he's an industry guy. And when you think about the White House and AI, do they communicate with Congress on this?
They don't communicate with me.
Okay.
But that's not surprising.
Right.
And I've not met Michael yet, but I'm hoping that he will be a soon guest at our AI caucus, and we'll get lots of people to turn out. By the way, the nice part is you get a bunch of members, but you get even more staff,
right.
Which, given that Capitol Hill is run by people under the age of 30, is a very good thing.
Who else, in your understanding, who else in the White House is involved in the AI portfolio? Is David Sachs active in this, or is he more of a crypto person, despite his title?
I don't know the Trump White House very well. Just by reading Politico.
We're glad to provide some service to our nation's legislature. That's very, but that fact is interesting though, that they don't have a presence on the Hill, or they're not actively engaging with both sides of the aisle.
Well, maybe they do, maybe just not with me.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So if I could, we have a little bit of time at the end. I wanted to get into a couple fun topics, if you call it that. One is I'm super curious how you yourself use AI. If you do, some people are interested in it without being very active with it, and some people play around and experiment.
Yeah, I don't. Frankly, I'm so busy with my coursework, I don't have a lot of time to play with it. However, it's great when I'm taking a linear algebra course right now. When there's something I don't understand, it's great to go to ChatGPT and put the problem in again and get their explanation.
Wait, what's the course? Linear algebra?
Yeah.
How's your degree going, by the way?
It's little by little. I'll be 80, I think, when I finish.
When you actually finish the
because I can only do one course a semester.
If the field changes that much while you're studying, is it even the same degree?
Well, I don't expect to get a degree coding at the end, because there may not be any coders by then. So,
right. Have you seen AI being used on the Hill, staff level?
Oh, absolutely. Because most of my team, if they're not scheduling or answering the phone, they're doing research on political issues and policy issues. And all the large language models are great resources for that.
Right.
You can't trust their citations.
That's wild, right?
Yeah, but you can get the general idea on a lot of things.
They're good at summarizing things, and then they make up their sources.
My wife is creating a little foundation, and she was talking about hiring a lawyer to do the articles of incorporation. I said, hey, that's going to cost you $10,000. She says, why don't you put it into Claude and see what it comes. 5 minutes later, she had articles of incorporation. So there's lots of helpful things.
But don't use the footnotes.
No. And she's going to run the articles of incorporation by a lawyer for $1,000 instead of $10,000.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you also, aside from getting a degree in machine learning, you have a sort of another unique distinction, which is that you had an entire bot built around your personality that stood in for you at a political debate. We wrote a thing about this. There was a Don bot, which was built around Representative Beyer's voice, writings, speeches, and then they had it stand in. Well, you didn't participate in the debate.
No.
Not my question to you.
No.
But you had there was a fake you that they really debated, and if you listen to it, it sounds like you, and it says many things that make sense and some things that don't. And
yeah, I was sort of flattered. I had the normal Republican running against me, and then two people from, I think, my left.
They're sort of an activist.
And one of them was a young computer scientist, 32, 33, very smart, whose whole idea of running for Congress was to come make government function better, which I very much appreciated. I thought he needed to be in an agency rather than Congress to do that. That his Doge type skills were not going to be useful there. But he built the bot, and I didn't want to do yet another debate with him. But I thought it was worthy.
But this is something that they can do without your permission. You didn't, there was no assent involved. They just were able to do it and stick you on screen.
But I was fully clothed, and I didn't.
You were a little head.
Yeah, exactly right. No sexual activity.
Right. So that has not been outlawed. Whatever it was has not yet been outlawed. But there are no provisions. They can copy a person. They can copy me. They can copy you. They've copied well-known psychologists. With no permission and no consent, and it's it seems like
the Bonnie Raitt Mick Jagger song that they were talking about yesterday. So.
Yeah.
One of the 80 bills in our task force report was specifically on political advertising.
Oh, interesting.
That if you used AI, it had to be disclosed prominently because everyone remembers the Joe Biden telephone call in the New Hampshire primary.
Yeah. That was one that we thought might actually happen before the election. There was a lot of talk about it.
We were surprised that it didn't. So.
We're about out of time, but is there anything that could happen on AI in Congress in this term? Besides, we saw Take It Down with Melania Trump getting behind it.
Yeah, so Take It Down did happen.
Yep.
Ted Cruz, lead sponsor, and it's law.
Yep.
One of the very few things we've done this year.
That's.
And I do think probably the centerpiece of the bipartisan thing was the so-called the Create AI Act, which is to create a big neural network through the National Science Foundation that has a curated data set fed on. GPT-4 is the entire internet.
Yeah.
What Sam Altman said was 6 trillion words, so completely not curated.
Right.
Lots of bad things in there, made up things. Yeah. To be available for students, businesses, small businesses, academics. Yeah. And that's very bipartisan. Jay and I are the co-leads on it. I think it can happen.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being here. It's great.
Thank you, Steve, very much. Thank you all for being patient.